Elena Voss had never wanted to be noticed. In the Thornwood pack, she was the healer's daughter, the quiet girl who mixed herbs by candlelight and mended wounds no one else wanted to touch. She was used to being overlooked, and she preferred it that way. Attention, in her experience, never brought anything good. That changed on the night King Cassian Draven walked into Thornwood Hall. He was the alpha of the Blackthorn Kingdom, a ruler known across every territory for his strength and his silence. He rarely traveled beyond his own borders, and when he did, it was never without purpose. That night, his purpose was simple. His wolf had caught a scent on the wind 3 days earlier, faint but unmistakable, and it had not let him rest since. He had followed it across 2 territories to find its source. He found her standing near the back of the hall, half hidden behind a group of pack elders, holding a tray of herbs she had been asked to deliver. The moment his eyes met hers, his wolf surged forward inside him, with a force he had never felt before. He crossed the room without thinking, and the entire hall fell silent as the King of Blackthorn knelt before a healer no one had ever paid attention to. "You are my mate," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Elena felt the weight of 100 eyes on her, and her stomach turned. She had heard stories about fated mates, about the mark, about what it meant to belong to a king. She had also heard stories about her own mother, who had served a cruel Luna for years before dying quietly, forgotten, worn down by a life spent pleasing someone else. Elena had made herself a promise a long time ago. She would never let another person own her life, no matter how powerful they were. So when Cassian offered her his hand and asked for the mark, right there, in front of everyone, she did the one thing no one expected. She said no. The hall gasped. Advisors exchanged nervous glances. Cassian's own guards shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what came next. No one refused a king. No one, especially not a wolf's true mate, turned down the mark in front of witnesses. It was almost unheard of. Cassian did not argue. He simply stood, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable, and walked out of the hall without another word. Elena expected that to be the end of it. Pack law was clear. When a mate was rejected, the wolf was supposed to grieve for a short time and then move on, drawn eventually to another candidate who could carry the bond forward. She assumed Cassian's wolf would settle within days, and life would return to normal. She went back to her herbs, her patience, her quiet life in the shadows of Thornwood. But normal never came. Word began to travel between the kingdoms. The King of Blackthorn had stopped training with his warriors. He barely ate. He rejected every Luna candidate his council brought before him, sometimes without even looking at them. His wolf, once steady and powerful, had grown restless and weak, pacing through his chambers at night, refusing to settle. The bond does not simply disappear because it is refused, the elders whispered. It only grows quieter, and in Cassian's case, it was not growing quiet at all. 3 months passed. Then Cassian returned to Thornwood. He did not arrive with guards this time, and he did not walk into the hall demanding anything. He came alone, dressed plainly, and asked only to speak with her. Elena agreed, mostly out of curiosity, though she told herself firmly that nothing had changed. They sat outside her small cottage as the sun went down, and for a long while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Cassian broke the silence. "I'm not here to ask for the mark again," he said. "I want to understand why you said no." Elena studied him carefully before answering. She told him about her mother, about the years spent watching a woman shrink herself smaller and smaller to fit into a role that was never truly hers. She told him she did not want to be a symbol, a title, or a possession. She wanted to matter as herself, not as someone's Luna. Cassian listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't think about what the mark meant to you," he admitted, "only what it meant to me. My wolf recognized you as an equal, not a subject. I should have made that clear from the beginning, instead of assuming you would want what tradition offered." It was not what Elena expected to hear. Kings did not usually admit they were wrong, especially not to a healer with no rank and no title. Something about his honesty settled uneasily into the space between them, cracking just slightly at the wall she had built. He stayed in Thornwood for 3 days. He asked no more of her than conversation, and slowly, without either of them planning it, the those conversations turned into something real. She learned that being a king was not the life of comfort people assumed. Cassian carried the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders, responsible for every soldier's life, every harvest, every decision that could mean peace or war. He had never had the luxury of choosing softness, not until his wolf chose her. He learned things about her too, that she treated sick villagers late at night, long after her official duties ended, asking for nothing in return, that she had buried both parents before she turned 20, and had raised herself on discipline and quiet strength ever since. That her refusal of him had never been about him at all. It had been about protecting the only thing she had left, which was her own freedom to choose her path. By the time Cassian returned to Blackthorn, something between them had shifted, though neither one said it aloud. Weeks passed. Messages traveled quietly between the two kingdoms, first about pack matters, then about smaller things. What Elena had been reading, whether Cassian's wolf had grown any calmer. Neither of them called it courtship, but it was becoming exactly that. One letter and one visit at a time. Then trouble arrived. A rival kingdom to the east, the Ravenhollow territory, had been watching Blackthorn for months. Ravenhollow's leaders knew that an unmarked king with a broken wolf was a vulnerable king. Without a Luna to complete the bond, Cassian's strength as alpha was weaker than it should have been, and his enemies knew it. They saw an opportunity to strike before he could recover, believing that a kingdom without its full strength would fall easily. The attack came at night, fast and brutal, striking the outer villages of Blackthorn first. Word reached Thornwood within hours, carried by an exhausted messenger who begged for healers to be sent immediately. Elena did not hesitate. She gathered her herbs, her tools, and everything she could carry, and left before the sun rose. She arrived at Blackthorn to find chaos. Wounded soldiers filled the halls of the castle, and the healers already there were overwhelmed. Elena worked without rest, moving from one soldier to the next, stopping bleeding, setting bones, calming fevers. She did not think about rank or politics. She only thought about saving as many lives as she could. Cassian found her hours later, her hands stained, her face pale with exhaustion, still working. He tried to convince her to rest, but she refused, telling him that people were dying and rest could wait. He did not argue further. Instead, he stayed beside her, helping carry the wounded, holding down soldiers who could not stay still through their treatment, doing whatever she asked without question. The fighting continued for 2 more days. Ravenhollow's forces pushed harder, testing Blackthorn's defenses at every gate. On the final night, in the chaos of a breach near the castle walls, an assassin slipped through the confusion, aiming not for a soldier, but for Cassian himself. Elena saw him first. She did not think, she simply moved, placing herself between the blade and the king, before either of them fully understood what was happening. The blow that was meant for Cassian struck her instead, and she fell before he could catch her. For a moment, the world around Cassian went silent. His wolf, already weakened and worn from months of restless grief, surged forward with a desperation that shook the ground beneath him. He fought off the assassin without mercy, and then dropped to his knees beside her, pressing his hands against the wound, calling her name over and over, as if his voice alone could keep her breathing. Elena survived. It was close, closer than anyone wanted to admit, but her body was strong, and the healers who had trained beside her for years fought just as hard to save her as she had fought to save everyone else. She spent days drifting in and out of consciousness, and Cassian did not leave her side, not once, not even when his advisors begged him to attend to the kingdom's recovery. When she finally woke, weak but alive, he was sitting beside her bed, his eyes red from exhaustion and worry. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Neither did you," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You stayed." He took her hand carefully, as if she might break. "I told myself I wouldn't ask for the mark again. Not until you wanted it for yourself, not because tradition demanded it, and not because my wolf couldn't survive without you. I still mean that. I'll wait as long as it takes." Elena looked at him for a long moment, thinking of everything that had brought her to this point. She thought of her mother, who had never been given a choice. She thought of the promise she had made herself years ago, to never belong to anyone against her will. But she also thought of the man in front of her, who had traveled across kingdoms, not to claim her, but to understand her, who had knelt beside wounded strangers with the same care he gave his own soldiers, who had waited, patiently and without pressure, for her to choose him on her own terms. This was not the same offer he had made in that crowded hall months ago. This was not a king demanding a mark in front of witnesses. This was simply a man, tired and worried, holding her hand and asking for nothing at all. "Ask me again," she said softly. "Not because your wolf needs it. Ask me because you want it." Cassian's breath caught. He leaned closer, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Elena Voss, will you accept my mark? Not as a king asking his mate, but as a man asking the woman he has chosen, freely and completely." She smiled, weak but certain. "Yes." There was no grand hall this time, no crowd of witnesses, no pressure of tradition weighing down the moment. Just before dawn, once she had regained enough strength to stand, they walked together to a quiet garden behind the castle, away from every eye but their own. The morning light spread gently across the grounds, as Cassian gently pressed his lips to her neck, completing the bond that had waited so long to be whole. His wolf, restless for months, finally settled. The unease that had followed him since the night in Thornwood Hall dissolved into something steady and calm, the way a storm quiets after finally being allowed to break. Lena felt it too, a warmth settling into her chest, not the weight of ownership she had always feared, but the comfort of being chosen and choosing in return. News of the bonding spread quickly through Blackthorn, and this time, no one whispered about a broken king or a stubborn wolf. Instead, they spoke of a healer who had saved their king's life, who had earned her place not through birthright or tradition, but through courage and choice. The kingdom welcomed her not as a symbol forced upon them, but as a woman they had watched fight for their people with everything she had. In the months that followed, Elena did not abandon her work as a healer. She built a proper healing house within the castle grounds, training others in her craft, ensuring that no village in Blackthorn would ever again be left without care during a crisis. Cassian supported her fully, understanding now that her strength was not something to be softened or hidden away behind a crown. It was something to be honored. Their bond, born from rejection and rebuilt through patience, became known throughout the kingdoms as proof that a true mate bond could not be rushed or forced, no matter how powerful the wolf calling for it might be. Cassian's wolf had refused every other candidate, not out of stubbornness, but out of certainty, and that certainty had waited until Elena was ready to meet it freely. In the end, the kingdom got its Luna, not because law or tradition had demanded it, but because two people had found their way to each other, despite every reason to walk away. And when Elena thought back to the night she had said no in a crowded hall, she felt no regret. That refusal had given her the space to become someone Cassian could truly stand beside, not as a possession, but as an equal, chosen by his wolf, and at last, chosen by herself.